Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I'm here with Joe Corallo, and we have the great honor of talking to Martha Thomases. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I don't even know where to begin. You've done so much over the years in comics. You've been involved in every major company. We're going to talk all through it, but you've contributed an amazing amount to comics, and we're just really thankful you've taken the time to talk to us.
Shaw, thank you.
I think, first we got to start with like, what comics were you reading as a kid? Because you're also a huge comics fan to this very day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I started reading comics when I was around 5. I was growing up in Youngstown, Ohio, and my parents got the Sunday Times sent to them. It was delivered to the train station in Youngstown where there was a comic book rack. And so we would go down to pick up the paper and I would get a comic. I was about 30 years old before I realized they did that so they could read the newspaper in peace. I started reading comics. I think I had Fantastic Four #1, but I stopped reading Marvels because distribution was so bad that Marvel stories continued, and if you missed a couple issues, you were doomed. Whereas DC Comics, you got 2 and sometimes 3 stories per. So I read a lot of DC. I love Superman. I love Supergirl. I don't know why it didn't bother me that she had to be kept secret when Superboy didn't have to be kept secret, but I loved that. I loved a character who had a robot double in a tree.
The very best of all comics.
Yes, I love the Legion of Superheroes. Again, I think I might have had some of those first stories. I mean, My mother threw all my comics out when I don't know what I did, but I had a refrigerator box full of comics, and it's gone now. That's why everybody's old comics are worth money, because I'm threw them out.
So many comics in the landfill. It's terrible.
And I continued to read them. I went to boarding school where it was really hard to read comics. Sometimes we would get love comics up there. That was something other girls liked. And we would act them out in the common room.
You've worked as a journalist, of course, as well. And you've written, again, articles for Village Voice, National Lampoon, Metropolitan, everybody. You've contributed so much to a bunch of different areas. I know we're going to get into it later. I'm not trying to jump ahead, but trying to give people a sense of you were the writer for Dakota North. You were the help me understand. You promoted Death of Superman. How you were involved in that whole storyline?
Right. I don't know how far back you want to go. I was brought into DC Comics as a PR person in 1990, and the first week I was there, I was trying to get a handle on what kind of stories were coming up. And everybody was really excited that there was going to be a new Robin, and Robin was going to have a new costume that Tim Burton had approved.
Okay.
And by the way, Clark and Lois are getting engaged.
Seems like the bigger story there.
And a comic that was shipping the same week. And I said, why are you doing this the same week? And everybody said, oh, nobody cares about Superman. And
wow. Okay.
What do you mean nobody? And it's like the books don't sell. I said, but they're getting engaged and nobody cares. And it's like people who grew up with George Reeves or Christopher Reeves feel like they know Clark and Lois. And if these characters are getting married, that's a story. No. Anyway.
Okay. Wow.
So that happened. And as it turned out, people at DC thought that was such a non-story that they hadn't told people in Burbank about it. So when it blew up, it was a shock. And as movie studios do and TV studios do, they were looking for a way to make it more make more money off it. And the book sold so well that they decided to do Lois and Clark.
Right.
And they told DC that Clark and Lois couldn't get married until they could get married on television. Well, Mike Carlin believed that Superman can't get divorced. Superman can't break his engagement. So they had to find a way to break the engagement without doing that. And that was how Death of Superman started. I didn't know this until after the fact.
Okay. I mean, so many things there. All right. So first, sorry, my head is still reeling at the idea that everybody's excited about a new Robin costume over the most iconic character maybe you have for your company.
Right.
Okay. All right.
It's known at DC as the person who liked Superman. Like that was a distinguishing characteristic.
Yeah. You and just the paying customers and fans. It's yeah, it works. All right. And then okay. So the studio gets wind of it. They do this. And as opposed to, I don't know, and the Death of Superman obviously worked out for them. But if the problem was we need to delay the engagement, I mean, it feels like there's a number of ways you could do that. You don't have to jump right to death.
I don't know. I was not part of the episode. But the idea was not so much that killing Superman was important, but showing the impact he had on everybody and what a world without a Superman would be like. They also didn't really expect the Death of Superman to blow up the way it did, because we used to say you kill Superman every 7 years, whether he needs it or not. Again, this time, because of the engagement, people felt like they were invested in it, and it was a big deal.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, yeah. Well, some things never change, I guess. Comics, these decisions.
And now, part of that Death of Superman, seeing how people reacted. So there was the issue. I think Wheezy wrote with Bill and Hillary at the funeral.
Yeah, that they wrote and drew before the election.
So how did that go? Did anyone at DC go like, are we jumping the gun? Do we need to have this in, or do it just go by?
I don't remember any complaints. I was very much Bill Clinton's supporter at the time, and I was trying to get the campaign to take advantage of it, which they did not. And as far as I know, Dan Jurgens, who was not a liberal Democrat like John Bogdanoff and Wheezy, I believe in his Return of Superman, played Bill Clinton as more of a loser, not losing the election, but more of a crummy president. Which is what the marketplace of ideas is for.
The circle of life, yes.
Yeah, Jurgens Bill Clinton rather was like Cyborg Superman. He's clearly the villain, but I'm too stupid to notice that. Yeah. But no, that's interesting stuff. But you also, I mean, at this time and before and after, you were getting you were one of the central figures involved in getting it on TV, like in Roseanne, people reading DC comics and stuff.
Mike Gold tells me that this happened because of Marty Pascoe, who was a writer on Roseanne, that was how comics got involved. But also John Goodman was a big fanboy. And we got asked to send them comics as props. And I not only sent comics, I sent posters, I sent T-shirts, I sent whatever I could get 3 of. The prop department needed 3. And I mean, the people from Roseanne, some of them would come to Comic-Con way before Comic-Con was the thing it is now. And it was fun to take them around and show them other comics. I got Milk and Cheese from Evan Dorkin on as well, because there's comics for everybody.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And were there other shows or TV appearances you got some comics or comic stuff on?
I really tried Letterman. We were across the street from Letterman. and I used to bring comics over there, but mostly that meant I could go and watch music rehearsals.
It's a line interest here. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was literally when you walk across the street to see somebody perform for free.
Yeah.
So I saw everybody from Tony Bennett to Lou Reed at Letterman.
Oh,
Nice.
Yeah.
You know.
I'm trying to think what other shows. It was mostly Roseanne. I would have liked to claim credit for the statue on Seinfeld, but I believe that was Jerry Seinfeld's personal statue.
Yeah, he was always very into the title, but so this cross promotion worked. I mean, the Death Superman was massive. I was running a shop at that time, and that was the happiest day of my life in terms of that shop. I mean, massive lines, people excited. I mean, every news station was covering this when it hit.
Well, did it carry over? Did people keep reading it? That was really the goal. The Death of Superman as a comic by itself is not so great, but as part of that years-long storyline, it's really good.
Yeah, it's nice to hear you say that. I think it's another way maybe the industry doesn't always think through. You know, we want this to last, and it did. I mean, it definitely sales started to taper off, but it reinvigorated that franchise. I mean, people were coming in and buying all the titles, and definitely very excited. I think the only negative was when he came back. The percentage of fans who were like, well, I had no idea this was going to happen. They killed him. How could he possibly come back? And these are the people who weren't reading comics and were very surprised they would not send their kids to college with Death of Superman issues. I
know people would call me and say, what's this going to be worth?
Yeah.
And I would say what people are willing to spend for it. I mean,
a perplexing answer.
We printed like in different formats. It printed something like 40 million copies. I mean, that's not a rare issue.
No, that seemed to escape a lot of people, but definitely there was like, I'm going to buy these 5 bagged copies. I'm not going to open them. And this is college tuition for all my kids.
But maybe
I did send issues ahead of time to the Tonight Show. I remember because Jay Leno wanted to wear an armband.
Yeah, that's right. The armband was shipping with that issue.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's weird to think about that. I don't know that we've had that kind of PR marketing effort that was felt. It hasn't felt that coordinated in a long time, even with all the big movies they put out. Death of Superman felt like a well orchestrated machine. From the retailer level, it felt like a lot of pieces were being lined up, and it was great. So I guess I have you to thank for a lot of that.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously other people in the marketing department worked it too, but I always thought the mission of my job was to bring happiness to millions. And because I had so much fun reading comic books as a kid, as an adult, even as the old fart that I am now. It's fun, and people need more fun. And we should be sharing this fun with them. And it's not so much fun to talk about, I have to have 5 bad copies to send my kids to college. That's pressure. But just sit and read a comic book for 10, 15 minutes and escape for a while. That's a wonderful thing.
Oh, it really is.
And, maybe now we step back a bit to...
sorry. No. You jumped in and you caught me with Robin being the thing they wanted to promote. And I'm going to be thinking about that tonight. Like, my family will be asleep and I'll be staring up the ceiling, pondering people, thinking that Robin was going to be the go-to. But anyway, sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No, I was just saying, so let's go more into your origin story when you moved to New York and how you got into comics and all that.
Well, I was always into comics. My husband and I wrote together a lot, and one of the things we pushed was to do a piece about comics for High Times. We wanted to write about, I think, Walt Simonson's Thor. I forget what else, but we went to DC. We got the assignment. We went to DC, and I met Denny O'Neil there, and I had read the Arsenal, Speedy is a Junkie stories.
Right.
When I was tripping on acid in high school. Only the first one, because again, distribution being a bitch, I could never find the second one. And so meeting Denny O'Neil just made my head explode. And then I found out he lived 2 blocks away from where we lived.
Oh, man.
So through Denny, I got to know a lot of other people, including Larry Hama, and that's how I started writing at Marvel. And Archie Goodwin, who was at Marvel then, my husband and I wrote about basically anything we wanted, tech for the magazine that Archie was editing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was how I met other people in comics. Is that the question I'm forgetting now?
No, I think you covered it. But and you would go on to know Denny, consider him a friend. You've gone to CBGBs with Denny.
Yeah, my friend, I did some work at Punk Magazine and knew those guys. And Legs McNeil, who was the resident punk at Punk Magazine, managed a band called Shrapnel. And Shrapnel was to Army Comics what Kiss was to superhero comics.
Oh, nice.
And they worshiped Denny. They would put us on the list and we would go watch them, and they would introduce him from the stage and he'd stand up and people would cheer. It was great.
That's awesome.
And Denny was editing a Spider-Man team-up book then, and Spider-Man and I think Doctor Strange teamed up and they put Shrapnel in the comic, which is perhaps my first PR gig in comics.
Oh, cool.
And Frank Miller drew that, and so we got Frank into CBGBs too. I think he was a teenager still. He was probably not old enough to drink.
Oh, man. Was it easier to do that kind of stuff then, do you think, to be able to just, bring some of these people into the comics? And
yeah, there was not security. Comics were not a big business like they are now. They weren't the intellectual property, research and development lab that they're considered now, because the special effects were not good enough to do that.
Right.
You remember the Incredible Hulk where it was 2 different actors instead of.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was introducing, I think it was Sean Murphy to the fact that they had Thor in that old Hulk TV series, and it just it's like, oh, what is this?
It's a wig. Yeah.
It's I don't know. It seems like, so it sounds cliche, but it sounds like a lot more creative freedom to do things. And
it was also the beginning of the direct market.
Right.
At the time, that was considered this great liberating thing, because instead of having to print all these issues for the newsstand and having 2/3 of them come back, you could make a profit off sales of 10,000, which was, I realize that's a bigger number now for small titles, but for a Marvel or DC, the first issue of Dakota North sold 120,000 copies and was canceled because the numbers weren't high enough. So that's what comics were doing then. So yeah, you could be much more flexible. If Thor was going to be a giant frog for a couple of months, what's the big deal?
Well, and selling 3x the amount they're selling today, it's more creative freedom and higher sales. So it's a good combo.
But First Comics was happening, and Frank Miller was just getting started out. I think he was just getting onto Daredevil, maybe, after Denny gave him that run on that Spider-Man team-up book. What else was happening? Bill Sienkiewicz was starting to happen.
Yeah.
All those guys were in the same studio, Upstart Studio. It was Howard Chaykin, Walter Simonson, Bill Sienkiewicz, and there was another person who I never knew as well. But those 3 guys, that's just an amazing group.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So how did Dakota North start? Like, what was the genesis, and how did you coordinate that with Larry? How did Tony Simons get involved? All that?
Well, Larry I was writing for Larry for Crazy Magazine, the humor magazine that Marvel did that was like a mad knockoff.
Mhm.
And we had been talking a lot about comics for women that didn't look like anything else. And originally we had thought about doing almost a telenovela. And Mary Wilshire and I were working something up where each page was a panel. And that didn't go anywhere, but it mutated into Dakota North. And I don't know exactly where Larry found Tony, but I was really excited because I had heard so much about the great energy that was involved with writers and artists working together. And I was really stupid about writing comics. I would write panels where somebody walked in the door, got a drink of water, and jumped out the window. You can't do that in one panel. I needed to talk to an artist about these things. And, but unfortunately, Tony not only didn't live in New York, he lived in Connecticut and quite often didn't pay his phone bill. So it was
nice.
a way to get in touch with him. But it worked out. It took me a lot of rewrites to get to a story, and I never knew where it was going. People asked me what was going to happen after those 5 issues. I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great story, and I mean, as Marvel has gone on to do Jessica Jones and kind of things that at least pay tribute to Dakota North as being kind of the inspiration behind things. I know that was part of what was said for Jessica Jones. They're totally very different, but still, I love this series. I mean, and it's fun. It's an engaging. I mean, it's a great read. Good characterization. I think a lot of people remember it very fondly. There's a collection out now, I think, that you can get. So finally, I mean, it took them long enough.
Well, the idea was that, she had her own life and things obviously went wrong in it, but like she wasn't basing her life around who she was dating.
Right.
Just trying to get her job done and her business happening. Maybe as she got more established, there would be a romance. I don't know. Again, I could never see more than an issue ahead, but she didn't define herself by her relationships.
No, it had a lot of action in it. It had a lot of different moving parts.
That was hard for me. Action is hard for me.
Mm-hmm. But was there anything in Dakota North you didn't get to do? Were there things that you wanted to do and, editorial or hire pushback on?
I wanted the designer character to be to have HIV. He was based on a friend of mine who died of HIV, and I was told we can't do that because people don't read comics for that, which I get, but it's unfortunate. I think it would have been a good storyline.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah, maybe the year. That's an odd comment. 86.
Yeah.
I think the country was ready to talk about it back then.
No, the president wasn't talking about it.
Well, no, but I mean, I don't know. It was showing up in other entertainment.
I mean, years later, I talked Neil Gaiman into doing Death Talks About Life and set that up with GMHC.
Yeah.
So I feel like it got out there, obviously in a much different form and actually a much better and more effective form.
Yeah. So when Dakota North wrapped up, like, how did you hear that they were stopping it? I was issue 5, I think, right? How did that happen?
Oh, I was sitting in Larry's office and I had my toddler child in there with me because I would bring him everywhere. And Jim Shooter just came in and told Larry. I don't even know if he noticed I was in the room.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
I mean, Larry Hama was a really tough editor to me. I mean, and to other people too, I think. And I was always a point of pride to me that he didn't make me cry, but I might have wrecked that track record that day.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, but you're friends with Larry Hama to this day.
Oh yeah, I adore Larry. Larry is the kind of person I moved to New York to know. He's an actor. He's a writer. He's an editor. He knows Stephen Sondheim, for crying out loud.
What's a good fun Larry Hama story then?
A good fun Larry Hama story. Larry was his assistant editor was Jim Owsley, who's now the writer Christopher Priest.
Right.
And I mean, Larry did go out of his way to hire people who were not the typical straight white guys that everybody else at Marvel hired. He hired women. He hired people of color. I'm not going to say nobody else did at Marvel because I couldn't swear to that. But and he had this band. They were called the Burning Sensations. That was all cartoonist Bobby London and God, I'm going to forget who else is in it. I found out there was another band called the Burning Sensations. So they changed their names to the Chaotix. But they used to play like the Marvel Christmas Party in the office.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think they played CBGBs once too. There's one video I found of them on YouTube.
Thank you very much. Perfect in every way. I wanna be with her every day. She lives way out in the desert so far away. Sits in a house, works on a macrame. I wanna tell her, so be my steady girl. The only thing is, she talks to the alien. 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 I wanna Star Trek. Her face is a set on stone. One step beyond. I can't have her until 2001. I was always afraid there'd be another man. Hey, wouldn't you know? It turned out to be a Tholian. I finally asked her if she would marry me.
Yeah.
So, so you also mentioned, Frank Miller, hanging out with him at CBGB's. Did you get to either work with Frank on anything or have any other fun sort of Frank stories over the years?
Most of my Frank stories after that involve him noticing how big Arthur, my son, got, because they knew me even before I was pregnant, much less after my giant child was born. My son is now like 6'2". I did arrange with Frank to buy the cover to the Daymore Red for a bar mitzvah present for Arthur. And I made a donation to Comic Book Legal Defense Fund and got that cover for him.
Oh, nice.
Very nice. Was working with Larry and kind of in Jim is there and these new talents are coming up and Marvel was it was a bit of a roller coaster, but they were getting a lot done. The direct market was getting more opportunities going. The 80s were kind of this explosion for that company in a good way. I'm struck by still, Dakota North selling, more than 100,000 copies and that not cutting it. Was there pressure on everybody that it's like, what was it like? I think
they got order numbers for later issues that must have gone way down because that's what happens with later issues.
True.
And there was the New Universe.
Right.
Was around the same time, and they were probably having to choose between the New Universe, which was Jim Shooter's baby, and other new titles. So I don't want to cast dispersions on Jim's motives, but I would have protected my titles over.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely, but it also, I mean, when you're dealing with that kind of volume and that kind of growth, it makes sense that you're steering there. But it's a completely different universe to today, which I think people struggle with a little bit because on one hand, you're looking at comics today, and you've got billion-dollar movies, and you have licensing everywhere, and you have the whole industry is massive, but the comics themselves are much smaller. Like you mentioned earlier, it's much more of an IP generating factory than maybe in the 80s, where these things were standing on their own, and you're making choices about keeping or cutting 100,000 copy book.
Well, there's also, I mean, the whole media, all of our habits are different today.
Yes, absolutely.
People are impatient because they didn't get all of WandaVision at once. They had to wait a week. Whereas we always had to wait a week to see an episode on TV. We would watch soap operas every day, and if you missed it, you missed it. They did not run it later in the day. They did not rerun it.
Yeah.
Mine was in a soap opera and got me hooked on All My Children. So,
yeah, there's no on demand, no streaming, it's on or it's not. There was a feature on VCRs to set it to record at a certain time so you wouldn't miss a show. That was
God forbid a football game ran long, because all of it would be.
Yeah, so the things have transformed just immensely, I guess, in that time. But do you think comics navigated that transformation well? Like
I like pamphlets. I still do, but I think they're a little archaic. I think that when DC launched Helix, the science fiction line that Transmetropolitan came out of, I remember thinking that launching them as pamphlets was a terrible idea, and they should launch them as trade paperbacks, because that's how science fiction readers were used to buying their books.
Right.
They weren't used to going to a comic book store. They were used to going to a bookstore and buying a whole book.
Yeah.
And the contracts were not written so that people could get paid enough to do a whole graphic novel-sized book on spec like that.
Mm-hmm.
Writers might have been able to handle it, but art, you can't draw 120 pages and the off chance that you're going to break even.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a big risk up front. Yeah.
So I get it, but it's a shame, because I don't think that's how those books should be marketed. And we're seeing changes now, especially in young adult lines.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect the page rate is not as good.
Yes, that seems to be clear. Yeah, it's much lower, but you have more of a guarantee. So it's, it isn't trying to juggle it, it seems.
And I think that's the wave of the future. I think people like running your business for people my age is stupid.
Yeah, things have changed. I mean, as much as I hate it myself, because I would much prefer, of course, floppies and having them come out like this. And but that's what I grew up with. And I
say that reading an issue of Superman is like calling my parents.
Yeah.
Every week, it's just, I just want to check in and see how he's doing.
Yeah. Yes.
That's not a big dramatic sales pitch to people who could be watching Tiger King or whatever.
No, maybe that's one of the, and not to go too far down the path, but it's, you were watching this generational divide. You have manga that's coming in very aggressively right now, but it is sold in collections, and it's much more, and the digital work is sold very much like a all you can eat kind of service. So it's meeting that younger audience that grew up with this. They have no concept of waiting a month to get another comic.
Right.
So it's an interesting transformation that's going on. Sorry, I got heavy there for a minute, but
we can also talk. I mean, it used to be, and still is for a lot of people, that they think comics are only superheroes. And I always say comics are a medium, not a genre.
Right.
We can talk about launching Vertigo now if you want, because
absolutely.
That was the big difference there to me, was not just that it was, often horror or thriller material or some kind of science fiction, but that it was it was writer driven in a way, or creator driven in a way that other comics were not. I mean, I think it at that time, people did not follow creative teams to the same degree that they would after Vertigo. That while I followed Denny O'Neil and other writers, it really was like Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman and Grant Morrison, Jamie Delano, Garth Ennis, Mark Miller, that Nancy Collins, Rachel Pollack.
Yeah.
I'm working my way through the list. Annie Nascenti, that started to be part of the appeal, and I was able to pitch stories to magazines like Details, Entertainment Weekly, by talking about hot young creators as opposed to just who the character was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, Mark Miller does listen. So you have anything to say or any stories?
I have a couple favorite Mark Miller stories. He and Grant were writing together a lot in the night. And I remember walking with them at San Diego from the convention center back to the hotel and running into McFarlane.
Oh, yeah, Todd
McFarlane. All I could think of was Scott for some reason. Todd McFarlane, who started to talk to Grant, and only to Grant, about all the things that Todd was doing. And it was really boring to stand around listening to this. And I mentioned to Mark, who had just had a baby, that a friend of mine who used to babysit for Abby Hoffman's kid would always marvel, kids are amazing. When they're bored, they just run around in circles. And Mark said, let's do it, and started running around circles around Todd and Grant. I did not notice him at all.
That's awesome.
Yeah. They said they wanted me to be a Bond villain, and they would be my henchmen.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. You said it. I think there was this transformation that seemed to hit with Vertigo where, and I guess some of the indie titles, maybe they were going on at the same time, where people started to become more interested in following creators than comics. I think Marvel through the 80s had a lot more people that were just into the comic. I mean, despite the really long runs with Claremont and what Miller was doing, people were still loyal to the character.
Eisner was starting a whole Tundra press around the same time. It wasn't that Vertigo did this, but I think within comics and having the DC muscle behind it made a bigger difference than other, excellent efforts.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. The marketing for Vertigo worked really well. I mean, it communicated what it was about. I think people got it right away. There was not a confusion about this imprint. I remember from the customer and from the store level, people were that all was very, very nice in how it played together, and I think it got it on the right foot. And we had some amazing comics come out of that, of course.
Well, you had, the people who were working editorially, Karen Berger and Shelley Roberg and Shelley Bond and Tom Pyre and Stuart Moore. They were amazing.
Yes. Did you also know, was it Lou Stathis who was there and passed away?
Name I couldn't think of. Thank you. Yeah, Lou brought in all sorts of people, and Axel Alonso was his assistant, and Axel didn't come from comics. He came from book publishing and journalism. So he had connections to different kinds of writers than comics had.
Yeah. And we really saw that play out then over the next 15 years or so, where this entire industry kind of changed. Mark Miller's mentioned a few times, I know on social media, I think in some interviews as well, just that the comic industry goes through these cycles of 15 to 20 years, and so that was the kind of a turning point, right at about that time period that we saw.
There was Milestone was around the same time too. Right. It was also a huge game changer, certainly for me. when you come from publishing, it's hard to notice how white everything is. But I had a period of time working in PR at B. Altman's, the big department store in New York, where there were so many more people of color on staff. There were people of color who were vice presidents. Something you never, I mean, the Village Voice didn't have people of color in those kinds of positions, and they considered themselves a reasonably radical paper. So that comics hadn't done that as much, that people like Rob Simpson, who was an editor at DC later, but when he was an intern at Marvel, I think people would accuse him of stealing all the time. I don't know if you know Rob Simpson. He's like this guy in the world. I could no more imagine him stealing than I could imagine him flying.
Yeah, that's absurd.
Yeah.
That's one of the nicest guys in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I was with my son at one of the New York cons, and my son was still a little kid, and he saw Rob Simpson trying to get a cab, and he couldn't get a cab, and Chris Claremont sticks out his hand and gets a cab for both of them. I mean, this was when Sovereign 7 was a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Milestone Media's they announced they're relaunching. They have a bunch of new books coming out, including Static, which is going to be Vita Ayala and Chris Cross.
Right.
And so tell us a little bit about, because Milestone Media was around the same time as Vertigo launching too. So what was it like?
It was like 92, 93. It was interesting. It was very hard to convince people that Milestone was not just a black imprint. And even though we kept trying to make that point in all the promotional material, between people only looking at the photograph of the founders, and there was that other publisher who accused them all of being Uncle Toms. That it was very hard to say, no, look, there's Ivan Velez here. There's all these other people who, I mean, there were people we didn't know what color they were because they were only communicating through FedEx and telephones.
Yeah.
Sure.
But I know that my son loved that line.
A lot of people, yeah.
Yeah.
That's over very nicely. I mean, it's interesting in Milestone, and it's a bigger topic. It feels like as time has gone by, people have changed, not changed the history, but they viewed that time period differently, completely. Because when it was out, I mean, I was selling those comics. You're right. There was trying to battle this interesting kind of dynamic of what it was. But I mean, if you picked up the comics, it clearly was something different.
Going back to like the point you were making too, I mean, this was also some of the earliest work of like J.H. Williams III, Roberto Ramos.
Michael Davis had a studio where he was bringing in all these new kids. They're not kids anymore. John Paul Leon and people like that. So there was a lot of new talent, people getting a chance. I knew Ivan from Tales of the Closet, series he did for the Hedrick Martin Institute, and I had met him through Howard Cruse and Ed Cedarbaum. But so many points of view that we had never seen before, and it was really thrilling. Yeah. There was a problem at DC in that even there, they often thought they're just comics for black people.
Yeah.
I remember one of the cons, there was it was being described that way, which I thought was very strange and was turning people away.
Yeah. You mentioned Howard Cruse, and I obviously got to know him later in his life, but you had known him for a very long time. He was a good friend of yours who we lost far too soon. Back in November of 2019, before he got to see the 25th anniversary of Stuck Rubber Baby, put out by First Second, which is a phenomenal work that's deeply underappreciated.
Underknown.
Yeah. Could you tell us a bit about your relationship with Howard? And
I met Howard at a Village Voice Christmas party. I forget who introduced us, but it was somebody who knew John and I like comics. So here's this cartoonist. And I just loved him. He and his then boyfriend, then husband, would babysit my son. They would come to, they were the perfect couple to invite to any dinner party because they would mesh with anybody. I mean, I invited them out to dinner with my parents. I invited them out to dinner with lawyers. I invited them out to dinner with other kinds of artists. I mean, they were just the perfect people. And I loved Wendell. I thought Wendell, Howard's strip in The Advocate, was just the funniest thing. I still do. I remember saying I thought it should be an HBO series, which I still think it should be an HBO series. And when that ended and Howard was looking for work, that was when Piranha Press was starting in DC, which evolved into Paradox. But I said you should pitch them because what can it hurt? And he pitched what turned into Stuck Rubber Baby.
Yeah, people who haven't heard it, we'll put some links throughout this on the screen. So there's some, it strikes me just, and maybe this is not it's too early to kind of go into this track, but it's, there's so much content out there that kind of has been not forgotten, just hidden, particularly in the mid to late 90s. A lot of things were going on with the industry that were troubling. Obviously that was a tough time, but throughout that decade, there's just a ton of books out there that people are just starting to now rediscover today.
Well, I mean, I got it reviewed in a fair number of places. Part of the problem at the time was you couldn't get things reviewed that had been published before, which made it very hard to get Sandman reviewed because it had been published as periodicals. I had 100 copies of Stuck Rubber Baby printed as photostats, so I could get them to places the 6 weeks ahead of publication that they required.
Yeah,
I remember it was expensive.
Yeah,
but I didn't know how else to get it out there.
Yeah.
Do you think, and this may be, I hear this a decent amount, and I'm not sure if this is just my bad misperception or everything else, but you mentioned this, I think, growth in the industry in the 90s. We getting a lot of different people in, a lot of different colors, different genders, starting to write comics, have opportunities, and actually be able to put out work, and that kind of exploded. And then it felt like we're going through that again today. Did something happen where, I guess my question is, did we go backward at some point? Because in the 90s, it felt like we got a lot of doors open for people, and then things quieted down, and now doors are opening back up for people. But
there was a lot of money in the movies and in television, and when there's a lot of money at stake, I think the bosses get more cautious.
Things retract back down.
Now that there's so much demand for so much content, I think it's opening up again. I think that people keeping their own trademarks and copyrights also makes a difference. That why should I sell my good idea to DC or Marvel and do it as work for hire when I can own everything and have some control? I don't know how much control you have, really. If you know,
True.
Yeah.
You know, I'm watching Resident Alien, and while I really like it, it's nothing like the comic.
Right.
Yeah. But and going back to Vertigo, I feel like we've mentioned Sandman a bit, but we really can't talk about Vertigo without talking about Neil and his impact on the line. Could you tell us a bit of like how you met Neil and
I had just gotten hired at DC, and Neil was touring with Terry Pratchett for Good Omens. And they were doing a signing at Forbidden Planet, so I went down and introduced myself. And I forget how many issues of Sandman were out at that point, just a couple. But I really liked it, so of course I was dying to meet him. And yeah, we became very good friends. I would call him about once a week just to see what was happening and to chat. He had a son a year older than my son and a daughter a year younger. And the kids got to be friends. We went to Disney World together a couple of times. I have pictures of Neil Gaiman riding a horse that I will blackmail him with if he doesn't come through for me in the future. But I also remember walking around a Chicago convention with my kid and with Michael Gaiman, and Arthur realizing that his mom might be a big deal, but not as big a deal as Michael's dad.
Aw.
Devastation on his face when he realized that.
Kids have a way of putting us in our place a bit, I think sometimes.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, I invited, I had, in the 80s, I did, even into the 90s, I did work for Norman Mailer. I invited him to dinner, him and his wife to dinner with Neil and his first wife, and got a blurb from Norman for Sandman. And Neil has said that was how bookstores started to take Sandman seriously. And that's one of the things that helped it to break through, was that it was not only in comic book stores, it was at bookstores where a lot of the audience really was.
Yeah. Because this is early on in comics being available in bookstores in that way.
Yeah.
And that maybe that teaches a lesson too, that the getting the comics into the right distribution area, getting it to where the audience actually was, of course, is a good idea. And
yeah, what a concept.
Yeah, amazing business concept here. I don't know why we're having to learn that again now, but that's maybe an odd mess. You mentioned it, I think, before we started recording. You were, and I think even there, you grew up with the Legion of Superheroes. You love that title. What's your best memory of that book, or who are your favorite characters of that?
I love Saturn Girl. I love Matter Eater Lad.
Mm-hmm.
That's like really the best superpower. I don't know how old I was when I realized that it was really funny that he was from the planet Bismol. Oh yes, of course. It's like Ultra Boy's name is Jonah. Duh.
Yeah. No, and your son also had a small part in Legion lore, I believe.
There are some books that little kids should have access to, and the Legion of Superheroes is one, because if you're playing with your friends, there's enough characters for everybody. Perfect. My son created a character for the Legion, Barber Boy, who can shoot gel out of his eyes.
Perfect.
Yeah. And actually, Michael Urey had Legion tryouts and put him into the tryouts. And Art did a signing at a comic book store that was around the corner from us.
Oh, very nice.
That's
nice.
Adorable.
Yeah.
What's your? Are you still keeping up with Legion today? Do you have you read it through the years?
Yeah, I think pretty much. Yeah.
What's your? Everybody has kind of a different one, but what's your era of choice? What was your?
The one I grew up with, right? But I did like the grown-up Legion. I loved Mark Waid's Legion.
Yeah. Excellent.
And Bendis seems to be having fun.
I can't tell if it's over or not. It feels like, yeah. Maybe that circles back to when you were doing kind of PR and working for DC in that capacity. It feels like they could use you today. Like, we need to get you in there now.
I I mean, I confess I can't keep up with how you promote things today because
Yeah, it's
social media as a whole, it changed way quickly.
hmm
But so circling back to a little earlier, when Jim Shooter came in and canceled Dakota North, were you thinking to yourself like, well, the guy did create the Fatal Five, so this makes sense? Like,
No. No, but I have to say that the character Mono scared the crap out of me. The idea that you can't touch anything
yeah,
just scared me.
yeah.
There's
No, he's great.
There's a lot of concepts in those earlier books that kind of left. I mean, you go back and you read that stuff, you didn't realize how intense some of that stuff is. Like they've homogenized actually big parts of it from how it used to be.
Yeah, I can't imagine them doing that like two-parter where like Universo pretends to be the president, and that is such a great, fast-paced, intense story that if it came out now would be
years. Yeah,
it would be years. It would be like a 50-part omnibus-sized event that ties into so many things. But like you used to be able to just do a two-parter and it was okay.
Oh, that Death of Superman full-length novel, right? That from the imaginary story from whatever. I mean, again, it still makes me cry.
It's funny to and then the Death of Superman in the comics. I remember at the time people talking about, oh man, there's so much excess. They're putting out 4 Superman books for a while. This is more than the industry can possibly take, and that seems very quaint by today's standards.
Well, the idea was that every week you got an update, and it's hard to read those collected because Mike Carlin believed that every comic could be somebody's first issue, so you had to be able to understand what was going on. So there's a lot of recapping.
How do you? I think there's some truth to that, though. I mean, especially now where it does feel like we've lost a bit of a generation coming into comics. There people are now steering toward other things, but comics as a whole is just a much bigger umbrella. But how important? How do you get new people into comics today? How would you fight?
I would make the comics. I used to say that I started to read mysteries by going and reading something that I had heard of, right? Like an Agatha Christie or Raymond Chandler or Dashiell Hammett. Like I had heard those were good. And so I would go and read that. And if they weren't any good, I probably wouldn't have continued to read mysteries. Similarly, if I hear, graphic novels are interesting, I should go and read something where I feel a little secure. So Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, whatever. They ought to reinforce you, and they ought to have elements that you're familiar with. And if I like a graphic novel that has those characters, maybe I'll pick up the comics. But the comics don't have anything to do necessarily with what I understand about the characters, especially if I'm watching like the CW or the Marvel Universe movies. And it's not that they have to eliminate stuff that people are enjoying now, but they ought to have entry level, not in terms of reading comprehension, but in terms of understanding who these characters are.
Yeah, I can't agree more. It does feel, and it was always a struggle for me to watch these billion-dollar movies come out, and people come in, and I think there was this myth perpetuated of saying, "Oh, the movie audience won't go to the comic shop." They did, though. Like lots of people came in, and what the retailers, at least in my area, learned was stock up on Funko and T-shirts and things because that was your most likely sale, not the comics. People would come in looking for. I mean, it really hit with Black Panther, and Ta-Nehisi Coates had a very engaging run, but it was not like the movie.
No.
I think they were doing Black Panther in space at the time when the movie was out. And so dads are bringing in their kids. And it's like, I'd like this comic. And you're like, okay, I can direct you to back issues or these toys, but it's just too much of a disconnect. So you didn't have that entry.
And I have a friend who was a journalist and he thought, oh, I should write graphic novels. I bet, that's a growing market. And he had heard that the best graphic novel was Watchmen.
Yeah.
And he was going to pick that up to learn how to write graphic novels. And I tried to say, no, that's like saying, I hear Finnegan's Wake is a good novel. I'm going to.
I'm curious if you have an opinion on this, because I'm seeing this happen a lot in Japan, and I'm seeing Europe kind of adopt it as well. I've been told that some of the South America market does this, but they're pushing really hard labeling the genre on the books, where it's clear just from the cover, this is romance, this is sports, this is superhero, this is Western, and it's really putting it out there. And the reasoning being, new people coming in, the idea of comics or graphic novels is not enough. They need to have the segmentation of, I need a comic, but I'm interested in a sports comic or romance comic.
Well, again, this was an argument I had at DC. I think your cover is a marketing tool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Tell the audience what it is. And there would be covers at Vertigo where you couldn't tell what the title was, much less what it was about. And it's not that it can't be beautiful. It just ought to be able to see what the title is.
Right.
And who the authors, the creators are. I think a cover can be moody. I don't know that you have to say it's romance or not. I mean, the reason to do that is the way they're racked in bookstores. Do you want to, again, it's a medium, not a genre. So if there's romance graphic novels, they should be racked with the romance books, not only with graphic novels.
It feels like the market here in North America is ready for that. More than ever, I feel people are ready to accept and adopt. They're not just looking for superheroes. Everybody's got different interests, and they're interested to be steered. It feels like maybe the industry is a couple steps behind, catching up with where the market is.
And genres are funny. I mean, the Watchmen TV show was not particularly a superhero show. I mean, there were some elements in it, but that wasn't really what kept you coming back. They played the Jeremy Irons stuff for laughs more than for drama. So
what's WandaVision there's certainly superhero elements. They had a fight in the end, no spoilers, but that's not your classic, Avengers movie.
I have a friend who's really into old television, and I'm thinking he might get a kick out of it. Even though he's not into superheroes at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I know a number of people who like the Dick Van Dyke Show and some of that stuff, and they loved kind of seeing that, but they were calling it an homage show, not a superhero show. So it's like, okay. It feels like there's a ton of availability. There's a ton of possibilities here, but the market's kind of got to have to adapt a bit.
I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious of some of the things you may have tried to suggest, back when you were there, that you got pushback on, but now has either been tried or has become common practice. Are there any things that...
Selling comics in bookstores. Yeah. There was so much resistance from the people who in the marketing department who worked with the direct market that we should treat bookstores like a market. Like they were very protective that comic book stores had to get books before bookstores. But if you were going to promote a book to the general public, you wanted to tell them a date it was available, if they went to a bookstore on that date, they wouldn't find it. And they won't necessarily go look for a comic book store. They just won't go back and look for anything.
Yeah.
I feel that way about digital comics. It's not my favorite way to read a comic. I like to turn a page. But if that's where the market is, then hype that. And I don't know how it works in terms of getting paid. I don't know what the royalty structure is for books on comicsology versus books. But
yeah.
But
over here, it's a little tougher. So
yeah. but it should be, you should be trying to get readers, period.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
because once you have readers, a proportion of them will go and buy comics wherever they can.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up because I feel like a lot of the conversation is very binary in a way where people talk about like, oh, it's those mean old shops that are holding us all back and are holding it hostage. But you're bringing up the point that it was DC's marketing department themselves being like, no, we gotta, do this.
Yeah. I mean, I have a book coming out, I hope next year, with Richard Case. Now, I adore Richard. Yeah. I mean, he does amazing work. I thought Doom Patrol was brilliant. I think the show owes a lot to Richard's design.
Absolutely.
But I don't know that any comic book store is going to say, oh, Martha Thomas's, who hasn't written anything for comics in 40 years, let's promote this book. Whereas a bookstore might actually do something with it based on the content.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and you're such a big fan of Richard's work on Doom Patrol that you own some art from that too.
Yes, I own the last page of his Doom Patrol with Grant Morrison.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, Richard spoke to both of us a few weeks ago and was great. I mean, always a fan of him and you. So the two of you together next year, that's going to be amazing.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess there's other elements of the Vertigo years. Like how did that go for you? Like you're inside there. You saw how Sandman expanded into multiple books and sort of the direction they went in. What was it like being there, figuring out which books were getting pushed and which ones maybe weren't in focus?
One of the books that I thought the covers were, especially the collections, were hard to read. I thought if you didn't know you were looking for Sandman, you might miss it.
I think it left some money on the table. I'd agree with you there. Absolutely, especially in crossover audiences outside of the people who are coming into the comic shop that had the comics in the pull box, that knew what they wanted. Right. There was always a lot of attention focused at that group, where arguably that group is the least. Yeah, I mean, as long as you're just delivering content, that group will follow along. It's the exploration of new markets that always felt like it was getting kind of the short end of the stick.
Well, again, I got Neil interviewed by Details, and I think my pitch was, this comic will get you laid.
Nice.
But somebody who read that and is going into a comic book shop looking for the books might not have even know how to ask for it.
Yes.
Much less find it on the racks, find it on the shelf.
Yeah.
I think it's a big problem. Yeah.
Speaking of having a hard time finding things, what's a book or maybe multiple books that Vertigo is putting out that you thought were amazing that just never really got picked up or moved?
I love Shade the Changing Man.
Oh, yes, that was my favorite. No, those are good. I mean, that was where Chris Bachalo got his start, or at least maybe not his start, but the recognition. I think. That was a great title.
But yeah, it's criminal that is not all collected. I think they put a few trades out and that was it.
Yeah, as far as that goes, Rachel Pollack's Doom Patrol I thought was brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Ted McKeever, incredible artist. I think you also have some original Ted McKeever art.
Yeah, I have 2 pieces of Ted McKeever art.
Yeah. And he, and I mean, Rachel's even, said it herself that, working together, like the collaboration there is really when I think them doing that run, that last half of that run was in particularly very strong. And, and Ted also worked on some other amazing things. Like I loved that Metropolis. Yes, that was so good.
And Dean Motter was doing something. He had done Mr. X, but he did something for Vertigo that was really good. I'm sorry, I have too many comic books in my head.
It's okay. That's a good problem to have.
Yes, absolutely. This is what happens when you read a
I
lot of
think about all the supporting cast characters I know that I could have remembered my Latin vocabulary, but no, I know the real names of the Legion of Superheroes characters.
Those are important. It's good stuff.
There's enough. I mean, I wouldn't want them to do this, but at this point, if they really went back and mined the old IP, I mean, there's enough to do movies forever.
Oh yeah. Again, one of my pet fantasies is that they will do more super pet stuff.
Yeah.
I know they did some cartoons, but I would like to really see Crypto and Streaky and Comet the Super Horse and Beppo the Super Monkey and Bat Hound and Prody the Protoplasm.
Well, I mean, Netflix and HBO Max are not shy about putting out some of these terrible talking dog movies. I mean, come on.
Yeah, you would think this is great for HBO Max as some kids content.
Yeah. Get a crypto series. I don't know why. I mean, yeah. There's like 15 of those done talking dog movies that my kids won't stop watching. So yeah. What about, do you hope at some point they do take Legion of Superheroes and put that out as and would you want to see it as like a live series or a movie or a
I think it would have to be a series because it's a lot of characters to introduce at once. I'm not sure I want it to be Greg Berlanti. I mean, I love Doom Patrol. Mm-hmm. My favorite thing about his shows is that the lipstick is always perfect. I don't know if you've noticed that. Characters that wear lipstick, they express a lot of their personality.
Yeah.
Color choices. But there's a sameness to them that I would like to see people play around with more, especially for the Legion. I mean, I like Brainiac 5 and Supergirl, and I like what they did, but I don't know that that's the way I want to see a whole series.
Feels like that could be a Game of Thrones level franchise for.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. No, for sure.
All the rape.
Yes. Yeah. Minimize that. Well, hopefully, 1,000 years from now, things are a little better anyway. So that wouldn't come up. But so are there other, sort of books they'd have you focus on? Like, how did that work when you were marketing? Were you sort of like, this is your slate you're promoting? Were you picking and choosing and seeing what was viable, and then you'd have to present it? Like, how did that work?
Well, I would try to stay on top of what was happening in the books, looking for things that might be newsworthy, that might get a little, blurb in USA Today in there, or I always said the last 3 minutes of the network news where there are human interest stories. Then there were things that the company was promoting. If I saw an element there that I thought the general public might be interested in. So in other words, if the only news hook is, to pick a recent example, that Brian Michael Bendis is writing it, people in comics care about that. The general public doesn't know what it is.
Right.
But Jimmy Olsen getting fired is something people can relate to.
Yeah.
Jimmy Olsen buying the planet.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't believe they didn't make a bigger deal out of that.
Yeah, I can't either. Actually, hearing you say that now, I mean, there's a lot of these moments that they're promoting the wrong things. They're promoting to a group of people that are already showing up to buy it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, again, I don't know where, USA Today is not where you place these stories anymore.
True.
I don't know who you place them with.
Well, I mean, there's so much news media out there right now, online news media, that desperately needs content, or at least I assume so, because some of the stories are terrible. But I would think that you could get some of these stories. I mean, Jimmy Olsen buying the planet, and people know Jimmy Olsen.
Rachel Maddow is a big fangirl.
Sure.
If you want to know, there's a guy who, I can't remember his name, I'm sorry, but he's an MSNBC contributor. He's a a black guy, and he always has a John Stewart Green Lantern figure behind him on his bookshelf.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope he's reading Jeff Thorne's Green Lantern, which is starring John Stewart.
Yeah, I mean, he's got glasses, and I think he teaches somewhere. I'm sorry to. Anyway, he's a very funny guy, and I would tell him that Jimmy Olsen bought the planet. I mean, I would be looking for people like that who might work it in.
Sure.
Your George Costanzas at the New York Times who are big, fans, and his collection's no joke. We saw some of his original art before, and he's got some great. I think he's had some Darwin Cook stuff.
Yeah,
too.
he did. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, he's limited in how much he can do at the time.
Yeah.
And
I mean, the stories are out there. I mean, if Fox ran that story about Superman not saying that he was going to add America in the Truth, Justice, American Way thing for weeks, I mean, that wouldn't shut up about that. And you've got tons of stories you could. That's not necessarily the best promotion you want, but the interest is there.
right, it doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, did you also get involved like when there would be like letters sent, or when people were like, "Oh, we got major backlash on this. What do we do now?" Or like, fans hate what we're doing with this character or this line.
When it got out that Superman was going to be killed by this monster Doomsday, and Mike Carlin said he was like an escaped mental patient. People who had mental health issues went crazy, and they sent out all this stuff. They doxed Wheezy and Walt.
Oh man! Oh my God!
We didn't have a name for it then, but
Yeah.
And, we kept trying to say he didn't say he was an escaped mental patient.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they had him in a straitjacket type thing because he's a prisoner who was being kind of bound up. That makes sense.
But yeah, so what you're telling us is that literally nothing happening now is remotely new. It's just it's literally just been exactly the same. We just hear about it now because of the internet.
Probably. And I mean, I remember calling my friend Dave Marsh was very active in anti-censorship stuff, and I remember calling him, and he said, "What do you expect? They're crazy."
Well, I was going to say earlier, the people with mental health issues went crazy over it. Yeah. That could have hurt itself.
No.
But
I would have liked Mike to have used better words, but
sure.
I'm not the police of Mike. And he did apologize. That was the other thing. I don't know what else he could have done. It was never published by us that Doomsday was like an escaped mental patient.
No, people have to be able to say things, and occasionally it be not exactly the right words. That's nuts. But I'm still wrapping my head around it. So you're telling me that people were angry and outraged decades ago? I thought this only happened in the last 3 or 4 years. I'm shocked. I tell you.
Outrage. I remember. But not enough to do anything about it. I mean, you don't like it, don't stop buying it.
Yeah.
So you were also there when other more controversial decisions were made, like Hal having that heel turn and becoming a villain and all that.
Yeah, that didn't affect me that much because I wasn't doing PR for the comic book market.
Mm-hmm.
I was only doing mainstream stuff, and people didn't know anything about Green Lantern at the time.
Yeah.
So, that didn't matter.
Yeah.
Pied Piper coming out was a bigger story.
And that one, that got Bill Loeb's the first GLAAD award.
Yeah, well, Kathy Renna, who was doing PR for GLAAD at the time, she was really into comics. In fact, she helped me with the Death Talks About Life stuff.
Oh, yeah.
so with her, we created that category. And yeah, it was Bill Loeb's Flash Run. I thought was terrific. So,
and is not collected like anywhere. It's a couple of issues in the end of Mike Barron's trade, and then there's they reprinted Nobody Dies in like that 80th annual hardcover. That's like it.
Yeah.
It's criminal. Again, it's criminal. That
what do you need that money for? You know?
Yeah, it's nuts. But you know, I don't think they've even finished reprinting all of Mark Waid's run either. So it's crazy. But to go back to words that were used that got Mike Carlin in trouble.
Yeah.
But you know, speaking of awards, you know, later on in your career, you got to be an Eisner judge.
Yes, that was fun.
Awesome.
I thought I read a lot of comics until I was an Eisner judge.
Well, you know, can you demystify that a bit for people?
Please.
Because, yeah, I think a lot of people see Eisner Awards, and especially if you're just a casual fan, you have no idea.
There are so many books published, and of course, people send them to the Eisners for consideration, as one would. And Jackie Estrada, who runs the awards, sends around books ahead of time. But really, you get together for a long weekend, and you're like locked in a room that is full of books, sorted more or less by the categories, and you're trying to get through them all. It's wonderful, but it's exhausting. There are so many books I had no idea, and things that I thought deserved awards I had never heard of. One of these books that I really like is called Irmina, Irmina. It's about a woman who, in Germany in the 30s, who's sent to England to learn, you know, for secretarial school essentially, and then has to go. Her family runs out of money, and she goes back to Germany and marries a Nazi. I never thought about that point of view before.
Yeah, the world completely changed. That's a great book, by the way. Yeah,
it's so good.
Yeah.
I've given away about 5 or 6 copies of it because it kills me. This, you know, what was it like to be German then?
Yeah,
and to only have, you know, what everybody else knows. You don't know what history is going to find out about Hitler.
Yeah, I'll put that up on the screen. That's an amazing title. People need to check out. But it's another one of these, like you said, that just a lot just disappears quietly through the cracks. There's so many comics out there. I hear people say, you know, I can't find a comic for me. It's like, it's out there.
You know, I used to do this at the book conventions where booksellers would come by and they'd say, "Oh, I don't like superheroes or whatever." And I said, "Tell me your favorite movie and I'll tell you a graphic novel you would like."
Yeah.
Can I show you my cat?
Please. Yeah.
Now, since she's named Selena, is that after Catwoman?
Yes. Although I have a friend whose name is Selena, she spells it different. And when I asked her if I could name my cat Selena, if she'd be insulted, she said, "No, I insist." So technically her name is Selena.
I see.
Excellent. Two birds, one stone. Yeah. Two cats. One well-done and one
yeah. What's some of your favorite appearances of Catwoman over the years?
I did like the Tom King Batman run.
Okay.
All right.
Nice.
Yeah, that one is good. A lot of people, that one seemed to be polarizing for people.
Yeah?
It became polarizing after the wedding, I think. Before that, I think before they knew the wedding wasn't going to happen, people were on board. And then I think after it became very popular to be like, "Oh, well, I didn't like it from the beginning." You know, like there was a lot more of...
No, I like Tom King. I
agree with you.
One of the things I argued heavily for as an Eisner judge was that his Ace the Bat Hound story was one of the greatest things ever.
I'm a bit partial to Batman Elmer Fudd myself.
Yeah,
but and not just because I love Silver St. Cloud, but that was part of it.
Oh, Silver St. Cloud never did it for me, but that's fine.
Yeah, that's okay. Here, I we're not gonna, dox each other and try to ruin each other's lives.
More
Amazing.
pleasures in the world. Good for you. I'm
Yeah,
sorry
no.
I'm missing out.
I'm glad
Absolutely.
you brought that up, though, because it's doing PR for that. That felt like, at least from kind of the other angle of it, because I think Joe's absolutely right. There's a lot of people who claim they hated that run from the beginning, but that was not the story that's told in the sales and what you're seeing in the shops. But when that wedding didn't happen, and I think the issue was not necessarily the comic or any of the content, it was that DC was pushing retail shops to order high on special wedding issues, and they were encouraging people to open up at midnight and do celebrations and everything else. And DC knew the wedding wasn't going to happen, so it felt like they were setting themselves up for just a crazy.
Well, that was stupid. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what, people were legit angry. I think that, it's actually maybe it's like you mentioned the reaction when Superman gets engaged to Lois. Maybe DC thought, them getting engaged or them getting married is not a big deal because comic fans, I've heard that before, they don't care about marriage that much. But to the contrary, like the fans were ready for it, or, and they felt like it was a huge bait and switch. And then after that, I think it all kind of toppled to some extent.
Is there anything going on like in comics right now that you think like they should be focusing, like changing how they're approaching the book market, or things that you think that would be a better way to access digital or anything like that?
Well, I mean, I'm really lucky. I live in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
so I have a selection of terrific comic book stores within a couple of miles of where I live.
Mm-hmm.
And oh God, 35, 40 years ago, where you couldn't walk into a comic book store if you were a woman without,
Sketchier, yes.
Yeah. Or you couldn't walk into a store without seeing a statue of a naked woman as you walk through the door.
Yeah.
It's much easier now. I think that I know, for example, that Forbidden Planet does events with the Strand bookstore that's right next to it, which is great for both of them, right?
Yeah.
I would like to see more cross marketing like that, so that people who don't know about comics know how to find them and have a staff that's savvy about entry level books.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
piece.
And it would be nice if the comic companies publish things for entry level readers. Again, entry level to the world that relate to the movies and the TV shows.
It feels like everybody is expecting the other person to do it. I talked to folks in the publishing arm, and they're like, well, that's kind of the retailer will help do that. And the retailer is going
material.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. As on the retailer side, it's like, I mean, any retailer wanting to stay in business will try different promotions, will do different things, will try and educate themselves so they could. And you mentioned, what movie do you like? Here's a book for you. But, they can only take that so far. And
that DC Direct or whatever that got swallowed up by HBO Max, but that was not a bad place in the sense that they would say, if you're watching, our Titans series, here's the comics it came out of.
Yeah.
If there were things like that, maybe you have to start off doing it digitally because that's where the viewers are. But include a coupon, some reason to walk into a store now that we can walk into stores sort of again.
Yeah. And, speaking of doing things in person again, you did touch on your experiences at conventions, and, one aspect of your job was sometimes being line police for signings and things like that. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, especially for Neil Gaiman, you would have these lines that were huge, and Neil would be, scheduled to do 2 hours, let's say, of signings. And not only do you get tired after 2 hours, but there were other people scheduled for the next 2 hours. So I would often be the bitch at the end of the line who would go stand and say, "I'm sorry, I'm the end of the line, that's it." And we'd work our way up, and people would be trying to get to Neil, and I'd go, "No, I'm sorry, this is it." And Neil would go, "No, come on."
Oh, that's always
Did you ever have to, were there like, I mean, because of who Neil was, were there ever like, celebrities or like big people that would try to, sneak by too or anything like that?
I don't remember that. He probably had his people that could schedule those.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah. It's tough. And that's a grind. I mean, working a show or working a line like that, it's like running a marathon.
Well, the rules at DC were that only the talent could sit down.
Yes.
That marketing people had to stand, and marketing people were there for 8-10 hours at a stretch.
Yeah.
So that was also a bitch.
That's nice. Yeah.
Jeez, yeah. But to end on or as we're coming to an end, what's like one of your best experiences with comics, whether it's reading something, working in or around comics? What's a great memory you have comics related?
To kind of leave us with.
Well, I mean, seeing Dakota North in print.
Yeah.
After all of that. When I was a kid and I would read, Superman, Archie, whatever, I don't think it ever occurred to me people wrote and drew it. I think it just appeared. It was just like a recording of their lives. So being part of creating that was really exciting for me.
And
Meeting Denny was also, a big deal. I had just started to work for Mailer, and telling Denny that I was more scared to meet him than I was to meet Norman was fun. Denny had a pen name of one of Norman's characters, Seamus O'Shaughnessy.
Mm. And so we'll have a link at the in the description so people can order Dakota North, Design of Dying, because it's still available, and might as well make them sell out at the distributor level.
Yes.
I had Dwayne McDuffie and his then wife to dinner with Norman Mailer and his wife, where we sat around and told blonde jokes, which were the thing at the time. That was also pretty damn good.
Nice.
That'd be a good memory. Martha, I want to just thank you so much for all the time today. These are great memories. We'll put up with it.
What could be more interesting?
I agree. No, we have to do this again sometime. Yeah. There's so many good stories to have, and hopefully we get to see you. And as things open up, we can meet up at a convention somewhere. I'm
fully vaccinated. Yay!
Excellent.
Oh, nice. Yes, I'm a week away, so hopefully.
Yeah, tomorrow or Monday is my 2-week. I guess for the vaccine to gel.
Yeah,
perfect. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear you're doing well, and I'm anxious to hear about your book next year with Richard. That'd be great.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Martha, Joe, and thank you very much as well for spending the time with us. And you'll see all the descriptions in the descriptions. You can see all the links to everything. Please go out and check it out. Dakota North, great book, and everything else. Martha, you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Bye.